Hello everyone, it's Rafael Gutierrez. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to answer a question that was asked of me as that falls by Mire Martial Arts in Concord. Uh, One of the big things I will tell you is asking questions, looking at what people are doing is actually a great way to figure out the best way to do things. Just because nobody can do everything. For instance, I do have my MD, but when it comes to translating Japanese, I don't even speak it. So doesn't really, I actually have to rely on other people for that. And I also have to rely on a lot of people for different aspects of martial arts that I haven't actually seen. I can only talk about the stuff I've seen in the US and in Okinawa, but there are so many other martial arts that actually are available that can teach us a lot of different things, regardless to what martial art you do. So asking questions, especially of someone who is knowledgeable, is a good way to expand your martial arts. So the question actually had to do with training and using shields when you kick. And I'm actually going to expand it from there because it does reach other different aspects of martial arts and martial art training. But before I go into that, at the same time I got that question, I also saw something that was pretty interesting. And that was a picture on Facebook, which said the body of a martial artist after 40. I'm 46 years old, and a lot of the stuff that they had, I don't have. So for instance, the picture said neck pain, shoulder pain, back pain, hip pain, knee pain, ankle pain. And I gotta say, I don't have any of that. And there's a reason behind that. It has to do with how you train. Now, in the past, there's people who grew up in the 80s, like me, who the idea was no pain, no gain. You muscle through it. Oh, if something hurts, walk it off and go back. Well, we know that that's actually incorrect. If you watch the last video I talked about, anytime you have pain, it's your body's way of telling you you're causing some sort of damage. That or you've already caused the damage and your body's just telling you, well, yeah, congratulations, you now have to live with this. And so, and me at 46, not having any pain really does tell you about how I train. I am not going to be injured, and I try to make sure that my students will not get injured. The way I do that is I do go into journal articles and see what they're saying the best way to train and what exercise should and shouldn't be done at certain ages. Now, when we're dealing with kicking and using a shield or not, we're usually looking for one of two types of damage. One of them would be traumatic damage, meaning I'm kicking a hard bag so hard that it's causing damage to my joints because of the force I'm kicking at. The other one would be if I'm not kicking at a shield and I'm hyperextending. Now, if you went through any of the anatomy videos, you heard me talk about flexion, extension, hyperextension. Surely, if you look at my neck, this would be flexion, this would be extension, and hyperextension would be bringing my head all the way up. Well, you can do that with your elbow too. Straight line would be extension. Now, when you actually deviate to the other side of the elbow, that's a hyperextension. And if you're constantly doing that you actually can do this with your knee and hips as well. If you're constantly doing these hyperextension moves, you can end up having long-term problems. And so that's one of the things that kicking a bag would help with. Now, if you're doing the technique correct, meaning you're not hyperextending, then you can do it in the air 100 times and it's not going to affect you. But the thing is, you have to know what you're doing. And that's actually why the answer is not so clear-cut. It's not hey, if you use bags, you protect. Hey, if you don't use bags, you protect. You have to look at what you're doing. And a lot of times you're better off going softer with less power to make sure the student is doing the technique correctly. A lot of times with big classes, we can't necessarily do it. And so different things happen. The other injury you might actually be able to prevent with shields is over-rotation if you're doing something like a roundhouse kick. Now, as long as you're not doing these over-rotations on the knee, you probably are not going to cause any damage. But if people don't understand the basics of how to do the technique, having a bag may actually end up being beneficial. So one of the big things is, it sounds like I'm saying, well, this is good and this is good. And yes, I am. Because depending on what the individual is doing and how much you can watch the individual do, it will change what damage the person will end up doing to themselves. So ideally, if the person is doing the technique correctly, they're not going to be injured. If they are feeling pain, it's a good idea for them to stop. Now, that actually also drove an idea, something that I've talked to other people about, and that's research bias. If you actually look at most researchers want to get the right answer. Most people want to know what is really going on, and they're not trying to say, well, look, I'm right, this is it, but it happens. I want you to think about this. Imagine you decide to teach martial arts, and you notice that, hey, if I do, my best students are doing this, so I'm going to make all my classes do the same technique, the same thing as what I taught them. I'm going to make the class specifically as these people, the best students, do it. Now, you can come out and be like, oh my God, this works great. And you can actually tell everyone, this is what I found works for me. That's one person. And the problem is this, as you've come out with your new way of doing it, you are actually maybe sometimes not meaning to, but you might be biased to your own results. In biology, in science, and medicine, people actually will do a research project. And after they're done doing the research, they'll hand it off to someone else. And a lot of times the other person will try to reproduce the same results. Now, let's say I found a way that seems to work better for my dojo. I pass it on to someone else, and they try it, and they find that it doesn't work for them. Well, that could actually mean a couple of different things. One thing that it could mean is, as I found a better way to do it, I think I found a better way to do it, I could be doing other things in there which make it better. The other person is just following the protocol because it's supposed to be better, and they're not necessarily adding the other things. So it's not what I'm using that makes it better, it's the other things that go along with it. If you look at research, that you will actually see that a lot of things are peer reviewed, where when people actually finish writing something in science, they pass it also on to someone else to read, to make sure that there's no biases, to make sure it makes sense. And even there, sometimes things get through and don't necessarily work the way they're supposed to. Now, how do you know if you're getting biased or not? Well, the simple truth is, unless you're actually going in and doing the experiment yourself, you don't know. You actually are dealing with humans, and humans will make mistakes because of variation, because of different things. A lot of times because that's what they want to believe. So for instance, if someone says, well, I want to see if there is one better way to punch. Well, how do you determine that? Well, the way I would do it is I would take the punch that I like and try to prove that it's actually a worse punch. I try to find the information saying, this is not good. Then I try to look at the other ones and see if there is a benefit or disadvantage to it. And if by looking at the independent data, you can then end up making a more rational decision. And that actually happens with a lot of things. And that happens with a lot of things. And it is your obligation as an instructor to see, is the person who's actually telling you what's actually going on, the better way to train, is it rational? Is it something that actually is supported by evidence? Is this person only trying to sell you something? Is this person actually an expert in that area? For instance, I actually do, like I said, I have an MD, but if I were to argue with someone with a PhD in English on the theories of literature, I wouldn't even want to open my mouth because, well, their doctorate is in literature. They probably know more about literature than most other people. Probably, I think, is a really light word. They know more than most people in literature because that's what they study. A lot of times when people don't necessarily have the background to study, they're going to get stuff wrong. And so that's why I tell people, make sure that your expert is an expert in what they're doing. If there's two people who disagree and they're both experts, go look at what their research is actually based on. For instance, one of the things I would tell you is if you disagree with something I say, rather than tell me, oh, well, I disagree, go to PubMed and look at, for instance, if you disagree with this video, look at hyperextension injuries and see if those actually if that actually makes sense based on what I'm saying here. Well, I hope you enjoy this video and have a nice day. What do you think?